Hey, it's Melanie Fine from ContentNerds.com, and I help business owners get more clients by writing and proliferating the type of content that builds tribes. And in this episode, I'm going to introduce you to the perfect blog post fill-in-the-blank template and show you where you can download your own copy. But before we begin, if you want my help writing content that your followers find irresistible and brings in leads on autopilot, go over to melaniescalendar.com, fill out a brief form, and we'll hop on a call to see if we're a good fit, and we'll go from there. My son went ice skating this week. This is maybe the third time in his life this Southern California boy has gone ice skating, and he hung on to the perimeter most of the time. He was far from alone. The middle of the rink was mostly empty space, whereas the perimeter was filled with people who needed something to hold on to. He complained about the slower traffic in front of him, and especially about one person whose preoccupation with her cell phone was holding everyone else up. As a seasoned Los Angeles driver, I could relate. As it is with my son in ice skating, it is with me in my writing. Sure, I can slop words on a blank screen like the best of them, but there's always a little bit of hesitation, an anxiety with the process that at times can cause me to procrastinate. I'd much rather hang on to something on the side. For me, that something to hold on to is an article writing template. This template allows me to not only create a fill-in-the-blanks outline, but fill-in-the-blanks content as well. Writing from a template has given the linear thinker in me, I'm a scientist by training, the railing and support from which to let the creative thinker in me flow. By the way, before you dismiss this as formulaic, many artists credit structure for allowing them the framework to do their best work. Without further introduction, let's get right down to it. Here's my template. The template asks, what is your article about? Tell a brief story that illustrates your topic. What points do you plan on making your article? Choose a minimum of 3. If you have trouble coming up with your points, think of the top questions people have about your topic. Rewrite point 1 here. What do you want to say about point 1? Tell a brief story or example that illustrates your point. What do the experts have to say that supports your point? Find support from 1 to 3 online sources for each point. Primary sources and secondary sources, such as the Harvard Business Review, are best. If there is an example that contradicts point number 1, explain what it is and why it doesn't apply here. Rewrite point 2. What do you want to say about point number 2? Tell a brief story or example that illustrates your point. What do the experts have to say that supports your point? Find support from 1 to 3 online sources for each point. Primary sources and secondary sources, such as the Harvard Business Review, are best. If there's an example that contradicts point number 2, explain what it is and why it doesn't apply here. Rewrite point 3. What do you want to say about point number 3? Tell a brief story or example that illustrates your point. What do the experts have to say that supports your point? Find support from 1 to 3 online sources for each point. Primary sources and secondary sources, such as Harvard Business Review, are best. If there's an example that contradicts point number 3, explain what it is and why it doesn't apply here. Conclusion. Tie up the article by going back to telling the original story after the character has learned the lessons in the above 3 or more points. By the way, you can access your own version of this template by going to bit.ly/posttemp. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/posttemp, POSTTEMP. Simply save it as a copy so you can edit it yourself. Here's how I filled in my template to write this article. So here I am at the article writing template, and I'm actually going to outline the article I'm currently writing using this template so you can see how I go from the blank page or the blank template to a completed article. So what is your article about? My article is about writing from a template. Tell a brief story that illustrates your topic. I'm going to tell the story of my son's ice skating adventure and how he likes to hold on to the sides so he doesn't fall. What points do you plan on making in your article? So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to introduce the template. 2 is I'm going to illustrate, outlining, and writing an article from the template. And 3, I'm going to discuss ways to veer off the template. Discuss ways to veer off from the template. To veer off the template should be enough. So rewrite point 1. Point 1 is illustrate the template. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. And I'll turn off the numbering. Introduce the template. What do I want to say about point 1? I want to introduce the template. So, but in introducing the template, I can go through and go over the points of the template or just show it. Here's the template, right? First part is what's your article about? Tell a brief story that illustrates your topic. What points do you plan on making? And then I'm going to elaborate on each point. So right now I'm in point 1, and this is going to be rinse and repeat with each subsequent point. Rewrite point 1. Introduce the template. What do I want to say about it? I want to introduce the template. So what I'm doing right here is I'm actually showing you, as I'm introducing the template, I'm actually showing you how I'm using it as well to outline the story. Tell a brief story example that illustrates your point. So the story I'm going to tell is how to go from the template to a completed article, to, let's say, to an outline, to a completed article. Next part, what do the experts have to say that support, what do they have to say that supports my point? Find support from 1 to 3 online sources for each point. Primary sources are, and secondary sources such as Harvard Business Review are best. So what do experts say about writing from a template? Well, let me see if I can do some research. I did some research a little bit before I started writing this article. And here's an article about why write in form from the Poetry Foundation. And it discusses, I read through this, and it talks about why artists need to practice their scales, why poets, even in this day and age where few poems rhyme and follow the structure that we learned, the iambic pentameter that we learned in grade school, how practicing through that, using that structure and that form allowed them to veer to a different and a more modern form. That everyone who studies these techniques, every artist, whether it's a visual artist or a musical artist or a creative writing artist, starts from form before she goes off form. I'm going to quote that in my article. So here's the link. And I would say the point is that form or learning form provides the creative springboard, which allows for even greater creative expression. Hopefully I'll say that better, but that's pretty much what the point is. If there's an example that contradicts point number 1, explain what it is and why it doesn't apply here. I could talk about artists who don't use form whatsoever, but I don't need to here. I don't feel the need to venture into that. So let me go to point 2. Point 2 is illustrating, outlining, and writing an article from the template. So I'm actually doing point 2 right here. Let me paste that here, right? Control C to copy and Control V to paste. And again, I'm going to take off the numbers there. So point 2 is illustrating, outlining, and writing an article from the template. So that's what I'm doing right now. So what do I want to say about point 2? I want to show how to use the template to write an article. Tell a brief story or example that illustrates your point. So the example is me showing you how to use the template to go from outline to finished article. What do the experts say that supports your point about using a template to write from? What was I looking for? Structure and creativity. Creativity must have structure. Why creativity doesn't have to be chaotic. Why structure is the best friend of creativity. Let me go to Science Direct. Creativity is commonly thought to depend on freedom and a lack of constraints. While this is true to a large extent, it neglects the creative potential of structure and constraints. I'll explain that freedom, while important for motivation and creativity, also implies complexity and cognitive load, and that this may paradoxically diminish creative performance. So, in this document, structure, what words were they using? I'm just going to quote that for now. So if there's an example that contradicts point 2, I'm sure there's many examples that contradict point 2. There are people that create without structure. But I could actually, I have a story here. So I'm thinking here, as a science teacher, I'd often go to workshops, and more than once, one of our activities would be to build a bridge. Now, if we weren't given any constraints and had open access to Lowe's, we'd spend hours, perhaps months, designing our bridge. However, invariably, the workshop would limit the building to, let's say, 15 minutes and provide us, and I shouldn't say provide, and limit us to only a few items, such as toothpicks, glue, and straws. By constraining us in both time and materials, we were able to be more creative and lessened the cognitive load of how and where to begin. Rewrite point 3. Point 3, let me find it. I'm going to copy and paste again. I don't really like these numbers here because I have to keep undoing them, so I'm just going to undo the numbers here. Discuss ways to veer off the template. What do I want to say about point 3? I want to say that a template is not meant to constrain you, but to serve as a jumping off point. Let's say as a springboard. I've used that word before. A template is not meant to constrain you, but to serve as a springboard. Just as a violinist spends hours and years practicing her scales in order to improve her technique, she is not constrained by these scales, but is able to perform at her best.
beyond the scales. I'm sure I can say that better, but I'll do that in the rewriting. So that's what I want to say about point 3. A brief story example that illustrates your point. I actually looked this up earlier. I have a quote from Picasso. Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. So it's not about abandoning the rules. It's not about not having rules, and it's not about just abandoning the rules. It's about learning them, and then you can break them. So I'm wondering if that's actually more of what the experts say. So let me move that down here. Tell a brief story that explains this. That's the story. I can talk about the violinist right here. There we go. Notice how it's sort of writing itself in this process. If there's an example that contradicts point number 3, again, I'm not going to do that here. I've got enough material. Conclusion. Tie up the article by going back to telling the original story after the character has learned the lessons in the above 3 or more points. So I'm going to go back to the story of my son's ice skating experience and how having the guardrails gives him the support he needs. He needs to leave them, to skate to the middle of the rink and back to the sides and return to them when needed. Okay, so that's my outline. That's my article template. So from here, I'm going to go back and write this article.
From the completed template, I now can write the rest of this article, never having to stare at a blank page. By the way, if you want to work with me and have me be the consistent content creation genie behind your enterprise, building your tribe, and bringing in leads daily, go over to melaniescalendar.com. You'll be directed to fill out a brief form, and we'll hop on a call to see if we're a good fit and go from there. You may be asking yourself, why write from a form? Though most modern poets have abandoned traditional form, they still study and write in it, if only to veer off from it in their own work. Learning form provides the creative springboard which allows for even greater creative expression. Form provides constraints that can allow for even greater creativity. Eric F. Rietschel, in his book Individual Creativity in the Workplace, agrees. He says, creativity is commonly thought to depend on freedom and a lack of constraints. While this is true to a large extent, it neglects the creative potential of structure and constraints. I will explain that freedom, while important for motivation and creativity, also implies complexity and cognitive load, and that this may paradoxically diminish creative performance. For example, as a science teacher, I've attended workshops on more than one occasion in which I've been teamed up with others to build a bridge. Now, if we weren't given any constraints and had open access to Lowe's, we'd spend hours, perhaps months, designing and building our bridge. Invariably, however, the workshop would give us only 15 minutes to design and build it and limit us to only a few items such as toothpicks, glue, and straws. By constraining us in both time and materials, we were able to be more creative and lessen the cognitive load of trying to figure out how and where to begin. Once you've outlined your article using the template, you are then free to veer off from form. Once you have the template in place, your article almost writes itself. Expand your points into sentences and your sentences into paragraphs. This template is meant only to guide you, however, not constrain you. Just as a violinist spends hours and years practicing her scales, she doesn't go on stage and perform scales for the audience. The scales do not limit, but rather inform her technique, allowing her to perform with greater mastery. For me, once I have the template in place, I can write freely and oftentimes rearrange the points I want to make and where I want to make them. Because once I start writing, the content often dictates the structure rather than the other way around. Still, the template reminds me of what points I want to make, and I weave them in the article where I see fit. Learn the rules like a pro, so you can break them like an artist, said Pablo Picasso. We all want something to hold on to, just as my son wanted to hold on to the sideboards of the ice rink. Given the security of the sideboards, however, he was able at times to leave them, balance himself on his own two narrow blades, and really skate. So too with writing. Using a template can give you the security of something to hold on to, while at the same time allowing you to leave it, balance yourself on your own 2 feet, and really write. I hope you find the template useful. Remember, if you're serious about building your tribe with irresistible content that brings in followers, leads, and clients on autopilot, go over to melaniescalendar.com, fill out the form there, and we'll get on a call to see if we're a good fit and go on from there.